So Don's gone this morning. I'm just filling in for him for 1 week, and I thought I would talk about the resurrections in the Bible. And I know Brother Mark, he had a good lesson on this many years ago. He's probably gonna the examples he had are the same ones I have, because there's only so many resurrections in the Bible. There's a number in the Old Testament and there's a number in the New Testament. And what's interesting to note by all these resurrections is we really don't have any information of these dead as to what they remember from the time that they were dead. And it's interesting that none of the writers thought it was necessary to record that for us. Um, I think the longest anyone, well, upon the death of Christ on the cross, we know that some of the saints rose, and we don't know how long some of them were dead. But we know for sure Lazarus was dead for 3 days. And that's probably a little bit longer than most of the cases that we see of other resurrections. They had just died. They had died and were being carried away. And, the custom for Jews would be to be buried within about 24 hours. Okay, so these resurrections of a body being brought down the street to Jesus, that would have probably been within 24 hours. But for Lazarus, he was dead for 3 days, and he went on to live. We see in John chapter 12 that Jesus goes to the home where Lazarus is, and Mary and Martha, and continues to be friends with them. And yet we don't see anything about Lazarus other than the fact that they sought to kill Lazarus. In John chapter 11, after Lazarus is resurrected, we see that the chief priests, they convene, and they say they're going to kill Jesus. And in chapter 12, they're going to go after Lazarus too, because Lazarus is well, there he is. He's alive, and everybody knew he was dead. So they want to squash this movement. And of course, of all the miracles that are performed, it seems that these resurrections get a lot of attention, rightfully so. If somebody's ill and has an ailment, leprosy or dropsy or hemorrhage of blood, some of the examples that we've seen in Scripture, not a lot of people know that you have those ailments. But if somebody's dead, obviously there's a greater amount of people that are going to know about that. So the miracles of resurrection of the dead is more well known and spreads. And so I think it's interesting for us to look at these cases and also see what the reaction is of other people that know about it happening. So let's start back in 1 Kings chapter 17 this morning. And of all the resurrections, we can pretty much attribute these resurrections to 5 different people. We've got Elijah, Elisha, Jesus, Peter, and Paul. They're going to be the ones that are going to resurrect everyone that we see in Scripture. Of the saints that are resurrected after the crucifixion of Christ is the only other one, that's going to be God himself that's going to raise these. But specifically mentioned, now we're going to start off with Elijah in 1 Kings chapter 17, starting in verse 17. It says, "Now it came about that after these things that the son of this woman, the mistress of the house, became sick. And his sickness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. And so she said to Elijah, 'What have I to do with you, O man of God? You have come to me to bring iniquity to remembrance and to put my son to death.' And he said to her, 'Give me your son.' And he took him from her bosom and carried him to the upper room where he was living and laid him on his own bed. And so he called the Lord and said, 'O Lord my God, that thou hast brought calamity to this widow in whom I am staying by causing her son to die.' And then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and called to the Lord and said, 'O Lord my God, I pray thee, let this child's life return to him.' And the Lord heard the voice of Elijah, and the life of the child returned to him, and he was revived. And Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper room into the house and gave him to his mother. And Elijah said, 'Your son is alive.' And then the woman said to Elijah, 'Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord is in the mouth of is truth.'" So here we've got this great story about Elijah uh, going to the home of this widow, and first there's this situation where there's a famine in the land. I think it's been 2.5 years, or it's about that amount of time, 3.5 years, without rain, and so there's nothing to eat. And Elijah's in the house. He knows of the situation, and she said, "I only have enough flour to make some bread for me and my son, and then we're going to die. That's all we have left." Okay. And Elijah said, "Why don't you make me a cake first and give it to me?" Well, imagine yourself. This is all the food you have, and you're planning on eating it with your son, and now this prophet's in your house and says he would like it. Well, she served him and gave it to him, and in doing so, uh, there's going to be a miracle performed, and he's going to tell her to go get a bunch of vessels in the house and start to fill them with oil, and don't bring a few, bring as many vessels as you can find. And she keeps pouring this oil, fills up every vessel in the house, and then the prophet Elijah says, "Well, now go sell this oil so that you can eat." And so she's provided for the remainder of the time of this famine just because of that. But because of the love that Elijah has for her and her son, um, he provides for her with the blessings of God with this oil. And after this happens, of course, the son dies, and she thinks that this is really unfortunate. Here the man of God is in her own house, and yet her son dies. And Elijah is going to do something about that. So he returns the life to the child through the power of God. And the woman says, "Now I know that you're a man of God," verse 24. So, good example. I wonder how many people heard about this. Obviously the child had just died, not a lot of time period for word to get around, probably, but um, we don't know the age of the child, but the child's brought back to life. The second example I'd like to look at is in 2 Kings chapter 4. 2 Kings chapter 4, starting in verse 18. So he said, "What then is it to be done for her?" That Gehazi answered, "Surely she has no son, and her husband is old." And he said, "Call her." When he had called her, she stood in the doorway. And he said, "At this season next year you shall embrace a son." And she said, "No, my lord, O man of God, do not lie to your maidservant." And the woman conceived and bore a son at the season next year, as Elisha said to her. When the child was grown, the day came, and he went out to his father to the reapers. And he said to his father, "My head, my head." And he said to his servant, "Carry him to his mother." When she had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat her on his lap until noon, and then died. And she went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, and shut the door behind him, and went out. And she called to her husband and said, "Please send me one of the servants of one of the donkeys, that I may run to the man of God and return." And he said, "Why will you go to him today? It is neither new moon or Sabbath." And she said, "It will be well." And she saddled the donkey and said to her servant, "Drive to go forward. Do not slow down the pace for me unless I tell you." So she went and came to the man of God to Mount Carmel. And it came about, when the man of God saw her at a distance, that he said to Gehazi his servant, "Behold, yonder is the Shunammite. Please run now to meet her and say to her, 'It is well with you. It is well with your husband. It is well with your child.'" And she answered, "It is well." When she came to the man of God to the hill, she caught hold of his feet, and Gehazi came near to push her away. But the man of God said, "Let her alone, for her soul is troubled within her, and the Lord has hidden it from me and not told me." And she said, "Did I ask for my son from my Lord? Did I say, 'Do not deceive me'?" And then he said to Gehazi, Gird up your loins and take my staff in your hand and go your way till you meet any man. Do not salute him. If anyone salutes you, do not answer him. And lay my staff on the lad's face. And the mother of the lad said, As the Lord lives, and as you live, you yourself live, I will not leave you. And he arose and followed her. Then Gehazi passed on before them and laid his staff on the lad's face, and there was neither sound nor response. So he returned to meet him and told him, The lad has not awakened. When Elisha came into the house, behold, the lad was dead and laid on his bed. And so he entered and shut the door behind them both and prayed to the Lord. And he went up and lay on the child and put his mouth on his mouth and his eyes on his eyes and his hands on his hands. And he stretched himself on him, and the flesh of the child became warm. And he returned and walked into the house, once back and forth, and went up and stretched himself on him. And the lad sneezed 7 times, and the lad opened his eyes. And he called Gehazi, and he said, Call the Shunammite. So he called her. And when she came in, he said, Take up your son. And she went in and fell at his feet and bowed herself on the ground, and she took up her son and went out. So here we've got an example, once again, of another child, a son, who she didn't have and was promised. Okay, and so she has this son, and one of the things she asks there early on, um, do not deceive me. You know, if you tell me something so great as this, don't don't you joke around, don't deceive me. And she does. She has the child, and then the child grows up, gets old enough to help his father out in the field, and some kind of problem with his head. He complains of it, and he goes to the house and ends up dying. Okay, and isn't it interesting? Um, what verse was that again? Um, where they say, It is well. Okay, verse 26. Please run out to meet her and say to her, Is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with your child? And she answered, It is well. Isn't that interesting? The mother would say, Yes, it's well. We sing that song, It is well with my soul, and we know the story behind that. I think Matt just had it in his lesson here a couple weeks ago. And, you know, when we're godly, when we're doing what he asks us to do, um, well, Romans 8:28, for all things work together for good for those that are called according to his purpose. Okay, so we know that, okay, we can't change it. But here she lost your son, and she's going to feel the effects of this, as we all do with the loss of loved ones, with sickness, with illness that happens in our families. Um, but can we all say it as well when we're in a situation like that? I think that shows the faith that we have and where we draw our strength from. So, but her loss is alleviated here as here this is Elisha that comes and restores life to this child. And the child sneezes 7 times. You know, anytime we see the number 7, we see a perfect number. We see a fullness, a completeness. So he sneezes, he wakes up, and another person we see in this story is Gehazi. We're going to see that just a little bit later when we see Naaman with leprosy. Gehazi is also the one that instructs, you know, Naaman to just go ahead and do what the prophet says. Because Gehazi has seen, you know, a miracle. She's seen God working through the prophets and knows that we should listen to these prophets. Okay? So once again, we see this child being resurrected and no other information given to us. Okay? Now, let's turn over to 2 Kings chapter 13, just a couple pages over, starting in verse 20. 2 Kings 13:20. And Elisha died, and they buried him. Now the bands of the Moabites would invade the land in the spring of the year, And as they were bearing the man, behold, they saw a marauding band, and they cast the man into the grave of Elisha. And when the man touched the bones of Elisha, he revived and stood on his feet. So this is just a quick note about Elisha's grave and how it was uncovered, how another man that had died, uh, I believe it was in battle here of some kind, he's thrown into this grave. And as soon as his body touches the bones of Elisha, life's brought back into him. And he jumps back, okay, alive. So interesting to see, you know, the power of some bones uh, of Elisha. We don't ever see anything like this again. And even with in the New Testament, when we see Stephen stoned to death and some of the apostles later on as they're martyred for their faith, we don't ever see anything like this happening. It's a one-time thing, and it's very interesting to see what happened here and the power of these bones. So those are the three examples we have in the Old Testament. I'm not aware of any others. Are you all aware of any others? Yes.
I would say the only resurrection else I'd say would be when Saul is talking to Samuel. Obviously, it's not a resurrection in the sense of he comes back to life, but his spirit is summoned. And he specifically says, basically says, why have you disturbed me? So I'd say that's the only example of someone being raised. And if anything, it does give us an example of what the heaven's like. It says, why have you disturbed me? So that doesn't
Hmm. Okay, that's a good point. Mhm. We do see upon the transfiguration of Jesus also, remember there were two that were with him? Do you remember who that was? Moses and Elijah, right? So here we see Elijah, the presence of him, and yes.
I was just wondering if this, with the Elijah here, when the body hit the bones, do you think it had something to do with the fact that Elisha was given a double portion of Elijah's power? That he was still so full of power?
Hmm. Okay, I've heard that before too. That when he um, was given the power, he's given the double power by God, and perhaps that has something to do with the what he can do or what his bones can do, his remains. Okay. All right, so let's turn over to the New Testament, Mark chapter 5. Mark 5. And this is going to be Jairus' daughter. Mark 5, verse 41. Well, let's back up to verse 35. Um, actually, earlier in the chapter here, we read about the child being sick, okay? So if you look up in verse 23, 24, Jesus is going to be interrupted in knowing about this little girl with the woman who has the hemorrhage of blood, okay? So he deals with her, and in the process of that happening down through verse 34 and verse 35, it says, and while he was still speaking, they came from the house of the synagogue official saying, your daughter has died. What trouble? Why trouble the teacher anymore? But Jesus, overhearing what had been spoken, said to the synagogue official, do not be afraid any longer, only believe. And he allowed no one to follow with him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. And they came to the house of the synagogue official, and he beheld a commotion, and people loudly weeping and wailing. Verse 39, and entering in, he said to them, why make a commotion and weep? The child has not died, but is asleep. And they began laughing at him. But putting them out, he took along the child's father and mother and his own companions and entered the room where the child was. And taking the child by the hand, he said to her, Tabitha, come, which translated means, little girl, I say to you, arise. And immediately the girl arose and began to walk, for she was 12 years old. And immediately they were completely astounded. And she gave them strict orders that they should tell no one about this. And he said that something should be given to her to eat. So, situation here where Jesus knows this little girl is ill, but in the time that precedes in healing this woman of the hemorrhage of blood, uh, takes too long, and now the girl dies, and the official that comes to tell this information says, "Don't bother Jesus anymore. It's too late. The girl's died." Okay, so quite similar to the example we have of Lazarus being resurrected, because he hears about Lazarus being sick, and he waits 3 days before he even journeys to go see Lazarus. And in that time period, Lazarus also dies. Okay? So here now this girl's dead, and everybody is going through the process of mourning, and Jesus arrives and says, "Well, she's asleep." And when we look at the word sleep, we see it's used sometimes with death. Uh, Fallen asleep. I think Stephen, when we read of his martyr in Acts chapter 7, we see that he fell asleep, but we know that's death. Okay, um, but Jesus is talking about death, of course, but yet he knows he's going to do something more. He's going to raise her. So he walks in, and he says these words, "Talitha cum," little girl, I say to you, arise. And the girl rises up. And we find out her age. She's 12 years old. And the people are astounded at the raising of this child. And once again, we don't read any more about this child. We don't know anything more. And yet, all these people that were mourning her loss, they're obviously, they know she's dead. They know it. And what are they told? The last verse of this chapter says, "Go and tell no one." He gave strict orders to them. Why is it that sometimes Jesus says, "Tell no one," and then other times um, he encourages them to say something? This is early in Jesus' ministry, isn't it? Okay. So I think that might change a little bit as we get to the end of his ministry, but his time has not come yet. And so while he wants to help, and he wants to help people of health issues, as this woman with a hemorrhage of blood, as well as helping somebody that was sick, died, and now resurrect them. Um, all of these things are done, obviously, to confirm the word. Okay, uh, Jesus needed to confirm who he was. The prophets Elijah and Elijah had to confirm who they were, because what was the sign of a false prophet? If they said something and it didn't happen, they were a false prophet. And what were you to do to a false prophet? You to put them to death. Okay, so we're confirming the word. The prophets Elijah and Elisha are confirming that they are from God. What they say, the messages that they have to tell to the leaders is true. It's real, and obey it. The same with Jesus now. Okay, he came to this earth as a child. He lived his life. He starts his ministry when he's approximately 30 years old, and now he's going about teaching and preaching righteousness. Why should we follow him? Okay, he's performing miracles. He's just raised somebody from the dead. That's eye opening. That gets attention, doesn't it? Okay, there's going to be crowds of people following after Jesus just for this. They're also going to follow him because they want physical things like food. When he feeds the 5,000, when he feeds the 3,000, there's a group of people that continue to follow him for physical things. And Jesus says, you need to follow me not only for physical, but for the spiritual things that I can give you. Listen to me. As he performs the miracles, he's confirming the word of the Father through him, that you should do what he says, that you should follow him, that you should believe him. Yes.
So something important to note is in comparison to when Elijah raised the boy and Jesus raised the girl, said, little girl, I say to you, the importance of that is it's proving Jesus' is Elijah called up to God. Jesus commanded her and showing that the authority is through God, really not right.
That's right. That's a good point to make. So Elijah and Elijah had to call upon the Lord to raise the dead. Jesus is able to raise the dead. I, okay, little girl, I say you are not a good point. Okay, now let's turn over to Luke chapter 7. Luke 7, verse 14. Let's start this 11. Luke 7, 11. And it came about that soon afterwards he went up to the city called Nain. And his disciples were going along with him, accompanied by a large multitude. Now as he approached the gate of the city, behold, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. Now a sizable crowd from the city was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he felt compassion for her, and said to her, do not grieve. And he came up and touched the coffin, and the bearers came to a halt. And he said, young man, I say to you, arise. And the dead man sat up and began to speak. And Jesus gave him back to his mother. Fear gripped them all. And they began glorifying God, saying, a great prophet has risen among us. And God has visited his people. And this report concerning him went out to all over Judea and in all the surrounding districts. So this also is early in Jesus' ministry, Luke 7. And here, as Jesus raises this boy from the dead, it's going up. The information is getting out. Okay, so a little different than the Jersey daughter. But this son, now once again, this is a young person. All of these have been examples of young people. We don't know how the man who's young in Elisha's grave was. This is a young person that has died, and everybody who made it there to the street, and like you said earlier, it was customary to bury each person within a day. Okay, so that's what's happening here, and Jesus sees this. Verse 13, he feels compassion on those that have lost this boy, okay, the family. He comes up, touches the coffin, and he comes to a halt, and he says, young man, I say to you, arise. So once again, yes, he is able to command a body to come back to life. And the boy sits up, speaks, and I commented in verse 16, a great prophet has arisen among us. This is the people saying this. That God has visited his people. So a great prophet, if you look at all of the Old Testament, you're going to see Elisha and Elijah. They are in that group. Obviously, you've got other writers, Isaiah, Jeremiah, all of the major minor prophets, really. But those that have risen from the dead, it was just Elisha and Elijah. That's what I think about when I do this story and this comment about them comparing Jesus to these prophets. And Jesus is a prophet. He's a prophet, he's a priest, he's a king, he's a savior. He's all of these things. And he's confirming once again who he is. Any other comments? Okay. Now we're going to go over to John 11. This is the story of Lazarus. And this one is the one that changes everything in Jesus' ministry. Because after he resurrects Lazarus from the dead, it's all up to Jesus. Okay? The chief priests, they decide that Jesus' time has come. And they're not going to put up with him any longer. They're going to take any opportunity they have to seize him, arrest him, and put him to death. Caiaphas says, hey, one man needs to die. Okay? And this is who they're talking about. It's Jesus. And so Lazarus here, and we can't read all of this, but we're quite familiar with the story of Lazarus. Obviously, he is of a wealthy family. They have good means, and even early in the chapter here, we see Jesus' feet being anointed. Where is that? Well, well, it's chapter 12. Um, Mary, in verse 3, is pouring this caustic perfume on Jesus' feet. So, somebody else said something? Verse 2. 11, verse 2. Okay, and it was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment like even Mary was his brother out of the sick. Okay. So this is kind of foretelling something in the future. Verse 2. Except for that actually happens in chapter 12. Is that right? That's the way I always understood it. Because it's being foretold here. But obviously they have means of wealth. And Jesus allows his feet to be anointed with this oil. Judas is there, he witnesses this, and says, hey, why wasn't this sold for, and the money given to help the poor? And Jesus said, well, she did the right thing. She's preparing me for, yes, he says in verse 7, let her alone in order that she may keep it to me for the day of my burial. For before you will always have, but you do not always have. So Jesus justified what Mary had done then, which is interesting. Okay. But yeah, he's very close to this family, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And he finds out Lazarus is sick. And he delays coming. Even the apostles mentioned it. Can we go? And Jesus, he takes his time. And he's doing this for a purpose. Because just healing another person, if we look at the end of John chapter 20, the end of John chapter 21, we see Jesus perform many other miracles. And if they were all recorded, everything, all the good things Jesus had ever done, all the books on earth would never be able to fill and tell us about it, which is stretches our mind to think about. We think about each of ourselves. All of our life can be put in a biography or not a biography. But the things that Jesus has done and the love that he has for us and the love of his Father cannot be recorded. It's beyond the ability of human minds to think about it. And yet, Jesus is going to delay going to see Lazarus. He finally comes to see him. We see in verse 17, he came, and Lazarus had already been in 4 days. Okay? And let's start reading verse 20. Martha, therefore, when she heard that Jesus was coming, went to meet him, and Mary still sat in the house. Martha, therefore, said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, your brother shall rise again. Martha said, I know he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. And he who believes in me shall live even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? And she said, yes, Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, even he who comes down into the world. So, the word I see that sticks out here is if. If you had come earlier, my brother Lazarus wouldn't have died. And we're going to see the sister Mary say the same thing down in verse 32. Therefore, when Mary came to where Jesus was, she saw him and fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. That's what we would probably all do and say, wouldn't we? If Jesus was a close friend of ours, I can see all of us saying that.
So just the way you mentioned about the bottom, I think the Lord did this on purpose so that we could read the old book and say, wow, we're going to be with him.
That's right. And the word if is a condition. traditional word, isn't it? It tells, when you're using it for somebody else, you're saying, hey, you had a couple choices. You know, did you make the right one? And when we use it for ourselves, you know, probably the decision hasn't been made yet. If I do this, if I do that, you know, we've got some choices. We can draw them up and lay it out, okay? And here we're giving the Son of God choices. And we're saying, hey, if you had been here, think of that different. Well, Jesus can totally turn this upside down, and he's going to resurrect Lazarus from the dead. After he's been in the grave several days.
I would say, even still, with that statement of even if they can whether or not God, there's still not a lack of faith. And she goes on to say, even now, you know, whatever you ask of God, God will do. And because of that, it's still showing that even though Lazarus has died, you know, the brother has died, she still has full faith in Jesus, that he's God, that he's capable of anything. And yeah, it's really cool.
Well, and we know there's a few people that are extremely close to Jesus. James and John, Peter, they were able to give witnesses from this last miracle for some weeks ago. But Mary, Martha, and Lazarus are very close to Jesus. When we see the foot of the cross, we see those faces. When we see going to the grave on the first day of the week, we see those faces. In fact, it's the women that first determined Jesus rose from the dead. And they go to John and they're like telling the story. And well, women can't be witnesses, can they? Okay? Their testimony isn't always backed up as being, okay, we gotta have a man go and check this out and then report back. But they were the first ones to see it. Why? They were close to Jesus. They were going to the grave of Jesus to make smell it. Okay? Because the process of decay was going to take place. But they're very close to Jesus. And yes, they know that there's a resurrection. They believe in it. They love Jesus. They believe what he's saying. She says this, you're the Son of God. Verse 27. You are the Christ, the Son of God. Okay, she knows for sure. Okay. Now down in verse 38, Jesus therefore, after being deeply moved, came to the tomb. Now it was a cave, the stone was lying against it. Jesus said, remove the tomb. Remove the stone. Martha, the sister of the deceased, said to him, Lord, by this time it's since it's been 4 days. But Jesus says in verse 43, Lazarus come forth, and he came forth, verse 44, bound hand and foot, wrapped in his face, wrapped it around the cloth. Jesus said to him, bind him, let him go. So the Jews believe him, and there's some Pharisees there, verse 46. We convene this, let's see, well, verse 47. The Pharisees convened a council saying, what are we to do about this man performing these many signs? So in the verses following, it's decided that, hey, he's going to have to die. We're going to take every opportunity, verse 53, from that day on, we plan together to kill him. Okay? And then they convened to kill Jesus. Lazarus also in that town. So I hope this has been informative to you. I think resurrection is something we all have to look forward to. I mean, we live our lives now, and there's many things that are important to us, but as we get older in life and we lay our bodies down, resurrection is all one thing we have to look forward to. And it's up to us to determine if that's going to be a resurrection of life or a resurrection of judgment or death. Okay? Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. Mary Martha definitely did lose her faith over the death of Lazarus. But it was she. Just like us, sometimes when things happen that we struggle with, not to believe God. We really struggle with. And Jesus himself loved that